Mordecai wouldn't bow before the guy because he's not going to bow before anybody but his God. And so when Haman would come into town, he had everybody bow because he just, was full of himself. Bow down. And Haman said, "Man, I didn't bow before you, nobody else except for my God." So he made it up in his mind. He says, the Jewish people are getting too strong. We're going to have them all killed, especially that Haman dude. That Mordecai guy. So Haman built these gallows. And he was going to hang this guy publicly as a show. See what happens to the next person that doesn't bow down before me. So Mordecai heard this. And he heard that for a price, and I can't even remember, I'm not going to, I want to say it's like 50,000 pieces of silver, that Haman was going to hire a band of people to go out and just execute every Jew that there was. Just kill them all. Let God sort them out. Like he really believed in God. So Mordecai heard about this, and he tore, and this was kind of a Jewish tradition, they tore their clothes off, and they would put on sackcloth and throw ashes on their head and wail and cry. And of course, if you thought you were about to die, you might do the same thing. So she was doing this at the entrance to the king's castle, or the king's house, where of course the queen, his niece, was living. And she heard this, and she was like, Go get some clothes for Duke, because you can't enter into the king's house with sackcloth and ashes on. So go clean him up and bring him in to see me. And he was like, "You just don't know what's going on, do you? You sit up here in your little palace and you don't have a clue. What's going on?" So she was like, well, what's the deal? He goes, "You need to seek the king. You need to go talk to your husband and tell him that this man Haman's trying to kill all of us Jews." And she's like, "Hey, you got me tore up, because I can't go into the king's presence unless he calls me. I don't care who you are. You don't go into the king's presence unless he calls you, or..." And he was like, "Don't think that because you're a queen that you're going to get hidden from the house. Your father's house and everybody else is going to perish. If you're a Jew, and you are, everybody's going to perish." So she's like, "Well, I'll tell you what. I'm going to do this thing." Mordecai says, "Hey, do you think that you're the queen for nothing? You were put here for such a time as this." So she made the decision. Whether I perish or whether I don't perish. It's Esther chapter 4. Verse 15, and Esther told them to reply to Mordecai. She told her maidservants, "Go tell Mordecai my answer. Go gather all the Jews who are present in Shushan and fast for me, neither eat nor drink for 3 days, day or night. My maids and I will likewise fast, and so I will go to the king, which is against the law. If I perish, I perish." So Mordecai went his way and did according to all that Esther commanded him. She had a destiny to fulfill, and she didn't care what was going to take. She was going to do it. If I perish, I perish. If I die, so what? I'm going to save my people. So she did. They went and did what she asked them to. They fasted. She fasted. And she got herself all gussied up. How you women do. Come on now. Let's be honest. She got herself all gussied up, and she went and stood outside the court of the king. Eventually she got his attention. He's like, "Hey, Esther, come on, girl. Come holler at your boy." So he held out his scepter and brought her in, and she touched the scepter, and she's like, "Hey, I want to holler at you." He's like, because she was, pretty tough looking, I'm assuming. And he goes, "Whatever you want to talk about, girl, we can talk about it. Up to half the kingdom. You want half the kingdom? It's yours. Whatever you want." And he says, she said, "I tell you what, I just want to have a little feast. I want to have a little feast. And to honor you. And that's all I'm really requesting." So she has this feast. And they honor her, and Mordecai's name comes up. And see, Mordecai had already saved the king's life at one point in time for some people that were speaking against him. They were going to try to kill the king. And Mordecai prophesied and said, hey man, these guys are trying to kill you, king. And it was brought to his remembrance now, all this time later. He goes, what happened to this Mordecai, that basically saved my life? And they were like, nothing. And nothing happened to him. We didn't honor him. We didn't bless him. We didn't do nothing. No, he didn't do nothing. So Haman, his right-hand man, comes off into the throne room, and the king summoned him, and he goes, hey, he says, what would you do for somebody that had, honored the king and was a blessing to the king and had done, everything that the king could ever desire and hope for and bless the king? And of course, Haman thought he was talking about him. He's like, oh man, I'd pull out all the stuff, put some king's clothes on him, parade him around the town. Pick one of your trusted men to parade him around the town and tell him how awesome this guy is, and that nobody in the kingdom ought to be second to the king alone except for this guy right here. That's what you ought to do. He's like, all right, cool. Now, we already talked about he couldn't stand Mordecai's, just hated his guts. Planning on hanging him, right? She goes, he said, that sounds like a good idea, Haman. Why don't you go out and do that for Mordecai? Snap! You got to be kidding me. So he goes out and, of course, does what the king had told him to do, gritting his teeth all the way. And then the queen comes and tells him, hey, you know that I'm a Jew, just like he's a Jew, the one that saved your life. And Haman has plans to have all the Jews executed. Tells them this at the feast. So, that would mean I'd be gone too. Haven't I found favor in your sight, king? So in a fit of rage, the king says, Mordecai, my signet ring, take it off of Haman's hand. It becomes yours now. You're second in command. Take Haman and go hang him on those gallows that were meant for you. We may be going through some hard times. We may be thinking that things are looking really bleak now. But in the matter of moments, if we're diligent to stay our course and to do what God's called us to do, we can be taken from where we are to where we need to be. Not trusting on what we see with our eyes, feel with our hands, but trusting on what the Word of God says. Haman and everything that he owned was turned over to Mordecai. And Haman because Esther was in the place that she was supposed to be, appointed by God. God has an appointed time and an appointed place for each and every one of you. But you're not going to know what it is until you start seeking His face and seeking His Word and then being obedient to do what He's called you to do. And it's going to take some time. We don't go 0 to 1,000 miles an hour in 1 second. But if we're diligent, just like when Mordecai was looking at death's door and that door got chopped down, things may be looking bleak for you. But if your trust is in the Lord, truly, not just that churchy talk, but for real, He's going to take you from where you are to where you need to be. He's going to provide you with the ability. He's going to show you the way. And He's going to put people in your place to lift you up. I've seen it. I know it. God's not a respecter of persons. If He'll do it for me, He'll do it for you. If He did it for the people in the Bible, if He did it for Esther, He'll do it for you. If He did it for Mordecai, He'll do it for you.
I'm trying